Hello, and welcome to the Kathleen Spracklin podcast. I am a woman on a mission to gather a cadre of writers, thinkers, and teachers who are transforming the world, one character at a time. But in the meantime, I'm teaching Zettelkasten, and we are in the middle of a wonderful series that a lot of you are really enjoying. We're covering How to Read a Book by Mortimer Adler, and we're relating this to how to read a book into your Zettelkasten and how to take information from this book about how to read a book and gather that into your Zettelkasten at the same time. So I hope you will join me and this series as we continue. We're already in chapter 8. We're in part 2, stage 2 of analytical reading, and we are on coming to terms with the author. And if you're following along, we're on page 96. So this will be a place for you to figure out how we do this, how we identify the terms, and how we figure out what their meaning is. So I've got a presentation prepared for you. So join me in the down-facing camera. I'll see you right over there. Okay, here we are ready to begin chapter 8, Coming to Terms with the Author. We're beginning with Mortimer Adler's motivation for why it is we need to come to terms with the author. And he makes a very good point that a term is the basic element of the communication of knowledge. And he says unless the reader comes to terms with the author, the communication of knowledge from one to the other does not take place. This makes a total amount of sense, but we must also make the effort to come to terms with the author as the first step in really grasping the book. And he points out that in fact, coming to terms with the author is almost a miracle of communication, because if you think about it, what you've got going on there are two different minds sharing the same thought. That is surprisingly difficult to take place because the same exact image must be present in both minds at the same time. I could go on with some background on that one, but it really, really is a miracle when you think about it, and it's incredibly powerful. Okay, now what do we mean by a term? We're not talking about just a word. We're saying that a term is a word that is used unambiguously by the author. And that means that any ambiguity that might normally be attached to that word, the author has taken care to get rid of that ambiguity so that we will understand how the author means that term to be used. So now we're ready to actually state this rule. This is the first of 4 rules for the second stage of analytical reading. We had rules 1 through 4 with the first stage of analytical reading, and we're going to get 5 through 8 in the second stage of analytical reading. So here we are with rule 5. Find the important words and through them come to terms with the author. That's his specific statement. And he points out that this requires 2 steps. Number 1, there's a grammatical aspect. We have to deal with the language and locate those terms. And then we have to have a logical aspect where we go beyond the language and elucidate the meaning. So what tools have we got so far for identifying those terms? Well, we've got our index that we already picked out some terms when we did our stage of superficial reading. And then at that point in time, we did pick out some of the terms that we could find mentioned in the index. But also knowing that this is going to be a part of analytical reading, going forward in the future, when we do the superficial reading of a book, we might want to jot down some of those terms to make this stage a lot easier when we come into the analytical reading of that same book. Okay. Now, this is an interesting card that I've made that has personal relevance to me. He talks about the fact that authors might be a little bit tricky in their terms because they might use everyday words in a technical sense, and they're going to be careful if they're careful as writers, they will make it well known to you that they are using this everyday word in a very specific sense. But if you don't pick up on that, if you don't take care to grasp the fact that they're using that word in a specialized way, then you're not going to get the meaning and the whole rest of what the author develops using those terms is always going to be fuzzy for you. Now, I have a personal example in the 3 kinds of courage. At an emotional level, we understand that there are 3 different kinds of courage. We understand this. Dogs understand this. Tigers and giraffes understand this. Let me give you an example. A giraffe understands that the water hole is a long way off, and he's simply got to get up the courage to get himself from where he is over to the over to the water hole. The giraffe also knows that he picked up a stone along the way, and it's painful every step, but by golly, he's determined to get to the water hole despite the pain. That takes the 2nd kind of courage. And lo and behold, when he gets within sight of the water hole, and thanks to his long neck, he can see this from a ways off because the tiger is drinking from the water hole. That brings up a 3rd kind of courage. So we understand at the emotional level there's 3 kinds of courage, and just about every animal that's even somewhat cognizant feels and knows there are 3 different kinds of courage. But try to find 3 different words in the English language that unambiguously separate the length of the journey from the pain and suffering, from the dangers, and you will not find them. So therefore, when I write about courage, I need to use words in a very technical way. Now, this is a really fun part, because now Adler's into, well then, okay, we know we need those terms. How are we going to discover the meaning of those terms? You know you've identified them, but how are you going to understand what they mean? And there's really only one way to do that, and that's from the other words that you do understand. And it's a rather interesting idea, because the question comes up then, well, that kind of seems like you're running in circles. And in fact, Adler uses the term that you're kind of on a merry-go-round ride with this, but he gives some examples about how this can actually be done deductively. Well, in point of fact, this happens in our own minds using our associative powers of our brain. And it does not have to be done deductively, thankfully. So I think this is a spot where Adler makes it more difficult than it really is. And I want to share with you an experience that I had while trying to acquire the ability to understand spoken Spanish. I had been studying Spanish for a number of years, and I wasn't getting anywhere with my audio comprehension. So I got the set of audio books of the Harry Potter series, since I was quite familiar with them in English. And I just listened to all 7 volumes straight through. And I had the kind of frustrating experience that I could only pick up a word here or there, just enough to really figure out where they were in the story. And knowing the story well, I could follow that along. And the first pass through, I only got about 20% of the language. I stopped right then, started right back from volume 1, and went through them again and again and again. And the amazing thing is that by the 4th time listening to those same 7 volumes, I was now picking up 80% or more of the language without doing any other study in between except listening to the books. That is the power of the associative mind to discover the meaning of words. This sounds scary, but all you really have to do is give it a try and you will get there. This also made me realize that this concept of cycling through is part of the power of Adler's method. You've gone through the several different passes of the book in your superficial reading phase, and now we're going through the book again in the analytical phase. This very fact of cycling through is built in to Adler's method. And I had an interesting thought along the way. And you see that star? For me, an asterisk on a card always means one and only one thing. It means there's something written on the back. I'm going to share another secret with you. When I am doing any serious reading, I do not read with my bare brain. I don't even just read with my bare brain plus a bib card. I read with my bare brain, a bib card, and a yellow legal pad, because I have a habit of sometimes getting great insights when I read. And when that happens, I want to make note of them. And so it was that, being inspired by Adler's text, I ended up writing down some thoughts about why this cycle through works. And I came up with some really interesting insights, and that is part of the reason we have trouble understanding a difficult work, is that fear jumps in, and fear blocks us, and we have this feeling that I'm not going to get it, I'm not going to get it. And when that happens, our brains can tend to shut down. Now, maybe you're fearless in the approach of the unknown, and you'll say, what? But I definitely experience this, and I suspect that others probably fear that as well. So I made some notes on that while I was reading. And because I never leave bare notes without any reference to and from where they're going, I also made note on the back of this card where I put those thoughts. Now, at this moment, this card doesn't have a number. So that means part of the reference is not complete, because over on the yellow legal pad, I will add this card number once this card has been assigned a place in my Zettelkasten. Now, at this stage in the chapter, we have covered the bulk of the generality, the meat of it, what the rule is, why you want to do the rule, and the rest of the book is either going into some more details or providing additional motivation. The rest of this chapter is about that. So this was a statement that I thought was so much fun that I really wanted to share it. And that is basically, when people say that the book was all Greek to them, what they're simply saying is that they have not tried to understand it, unless, of course, it actually is in Greek. So at that point, I had another reflection. Now, this one was just a shorty reflection, so I made a reflection note in a main card, in part because it was short, and also in part because I think I want to have it in my Zettelkasten. And that is that when people use the power of context to provide meaning to words, we're actually drawing on the amazing power of our associative brain. Now, for the associative brain to lock onto a problem and actually work on it for us, you need a combination of desire, the will has to go into it, and the deliberative mind has to take a stab at it. And when you really want it and the deliberative mind can't deliver it, you've created a problem, and that's the kind of problem that the associative brain loves to work on. So that is the important steps. Mortimer Adler says you're going to get the meaning out of it from the words around it, but if you want to do it easily and not dig it out manually, what you have to do is take a run at it, desire to know what it means, take a stab at it, and be able to say, I want to understand this, and then wait. Your associative brain will help. Now, the remainder of the chapter brings up a few minor points. Now, these are things that, in my world, these would just stay on a bib card. I would not make a main card out of this. This is not a main card that's going to go into my system, and I'll tell you why it's not. It's not one thought, it's four thoughts. So this thought, a whole phrase may be a term, is going to want a different parent than the phrase the author might not have done his job in disambiguating his terms. It might not be a good book. Well, that's going to have a different parent. So that means I cannot put these two thoughts on the same card because they're going to fight over who the parent is. And that is what gives rise to the rule of thumb that you've probably heard 1,000 times with your Zettelkasten, is that each card must have one and only one idea present on it. And the reason is quite simply, as soon as you have more than one idea, you're going to have a battle over where the card gets to go, which parent it gets to attach to. And also, these are sufficiently minor points that I think I would probably just leave them on the bib card, and I would be content to see them again when I do a review in a few months' time of what did I really learn from that Adler book, and I reread my bib card and I say, okay, there it all is. It all comes back to me. Okay, now there's a big chunk of work here that I'm not showing you with these cards, and that is the concept that you've actually got to do the work. And here I'm running into a challenge because as it is, It's taking me a couple of days to do the work, absolutely grasping everything there is to learn out of the latest chapter in Adler's book. And now if I'm going to actually do the steps and identify and come to terms with all the terms in this book, that's going to take a little while as well. I will do that work because I'm committed to doing that work. And if it turns out that there's sufficient added insight that I get by doing that work, that I think it would be valuable to share that with you, then I will make another video of applying Rule 5 to our book that we've been working on, Start With Why. And in either case, in my next video, I will give at least a brief summary of what I discovered when applying Rule 5 to Start With Why. I hope you enjoyed our coverage of Chapter 8 of How to Read a Book in Part 2 of Analytical Reading, Stage 2, where we're going to have 4 rules, and we've just gotten the first one today. So please stay with me for the rest of the series. Now, there might be another piece to this section if it turns out when I go through those very steps in Start With Why by Simon Sinek, if I get some significant insights that I think would be worth sharing with you, then I will do a supplementary video covering how those cards that we created in Chapter 8 apply to reading this book. And if not, then we'll just go on with Chapter 9, and I'll just tell you briefly what I've learned doing this with Chapter 8. See you later. Bye-bye.